Welcome to our webinars, Friday webinars at the Business School. My name is Marjorie Wharton. I am the Strategic Business Services Director and Clinical Faculty with the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business at UWI Cave Hill campus, and I am the host for this event today. Our topic is Coping with Challenges, Strategies for HR Managers, and this webinar will turn the lens on HR's past, present, and future. Specifically, we will begin by recapping the primary challenge that confronted HR during the past 15 years and examine the progress that has been made during that time. We will then assess how the COVID-19 pandemic is currently impacting the HR landscape and the associated effects on the physical and emotional well-being of workers, including HR professionals themselves. We will conclude by turning our attention to how HR can best position itself to effectively address the peri- and post-pandemic realities. Our emphasis will be on purposeful preparations, the strategies that HR can begin implementing today in order to ensure readiness for what lies ahead. In proposing those strategies, we will take into consideration the peculiar challenges associated with today's VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. As always, this webinar is scheduled to run for 1 hour and 15 minutes. As the discussion progresses, please feel free to ask your questions as well. On your screens, you will find the control panel, which will give you an option labeled Q&A. You may use that option at any point during the webinar to submit your questions to us. You can also feel free to use the chat feature to comment or to ask your questions as well. As we go along, our presenter will try to respond to as many of the questions as time allows. Now let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Ambassador Joan Underwood is a senior management consultant and policy advisor with extensive experience in both the public and private sectors. Specific areas of expertise include the design and implementation of training programs for public and private sector executives, organizational behavior and management, human resource management, strategic planning and management, change management, corporate governance, public sector transformation, and executive and performance coaching. In addition to her work in coaching, management, and policy, Joan has served for 7.5 years as Antigua and Barbuda's non-resident ambassador to a number of Latin American countries, including Mexico, Venezuela, Chile, and Brazil. In 2009, Joan was certified with distinction by the US-based HR Certification Institute as a senior professional in human resources. In August 2015, she fulfilled the requirements for the Society of Human Resource Management's designation as a senior certified professional.
Thank you, Marjorie, for the introduction. And I trust that all of you joining us via Zoom, that you are coping during the era of COVID. So it's my absolute pleasure to be able to partner with the Cave Hill School of Business once again. So we have a lot to cover today. So I'm gonna jump right in and start sharing with you the presentation. And as Marjorie indicated previously, we invite you to share your thoughts, your comments, your questions, using the features that are available for you to do so. I'm going to chunk the presentation, so I'll present some content, then we'll stop and have the opportunity to discuss what I've covered and any questions that you might have related to that. Okay, so could I just get a verbal confirmation that you are this time able to see my screen?
I am seeing you, I am seeing your screen, and I am hearing you.
Excellent, here we go. So as Marjorie mentioned, we're going to start in the past and work our way to the present and do some projections for the future. So about 15 years ago, you may recall that the primary challenge confronting us as HR practitioners was the perception, among others, that we weren't being sufficiently strategic, that HR didn't align what it was doing sufficiently to the organization's business goals. So that was in 2005, and I've shared here with you a quotation from what was then a best-selling publication. So let's take the pulse and see where we are today. How does the current status of HR compare to what obtained 15 years ago when our primary challenge was that of not being sufficiently strategic? And the first data source that we're going to look at is an HR.com 2009 survey. And that survey had some good news for us as it related to the challenge from 2005. And that is that in the 2009 survey, it was found that we are well aligned to the organizational goals. And to put some stats behind that, 63% of respondents said that there was a high to very high level of alignment between the HR goals and the organizational goals. If we reduce that to a moderate level of alignment, we see that there were over 90% of respondents who indicated that there was alignment. So we see that by 2019, we had essentially broken the back of the major challenge that confronted us in 2005. However, there was some bad news to go along with that good news. And we found that HR departments were spending too much time on admin work instead of high-value collaboration. And I would bet my bottom dollar that some of you are nodding your heads at this point in time because you know that you have a lot of back office paperwork that needs to get done, but it prevents you from having the time, the space, head space, and time space that you'd like to do some additional things. So I'm drawing your attention now to the graph at the bottom of the screen. And this is the response to the question, what proportion of the HR department's time is spent on admin or back office duties? And I'm drawing your attention to those bars which are in orange. And you will notice that 37% of the respondents said that they're spending 41 to 60% of their time on back office work. 61 to 80%, as many as 28% of respondents. And look, there were even 6% of respondents who indicated that they're spending 81 to 100% of their time on admin work. So if you think about that, that means that there's not much scope to be doing the other more high value items. So we see that 82% of HR practitioners said that the lost time that they were spending on this admin work could be spent better elsewhere. And again, this is not to say that the admin work doesn't need to get done, but when it's taking up 81 to 100% of your time, clearly that's not what you want to be doing. So that's from HR.com. So I myself conducted a survey just before the pandemic was declared. It was a survey of Caribbean professionals. And the survey was designed to assess the level of stress being experienced by Caribbean professionals and to get some information in terms of what they were doing to cope with that stress. And what the sunburst chart shows us, if you look to the right of your screen, is that 42% of the respondents indicated that they were feeling stressed. Then if we move anti-clockwise, you'll see that 37% said they were feeling stretched. And 21% said, I'm good, I'm feeling comfortable. So when you look at it, 37 plus 42, that's how many of us are feeling stretched to stressed. And I emphasize again, this is before COVID. We also looked at how many hours our Caribbean professionals were working within a given week. And for those working less than 40 hours a week, you'll see that it wasn't even 10%, 7.5%. Between 40 and 50 hours, we had just slightly over half of our survey sample. And then between 50 and 60 hours, we had 31.3%. So people are putting in a lot of hours. And that's probably why we have the results we see on this next chart, which tells us about how much sleep we're getting on an average weeknight. And I don't know if you're anything like me, because what jumps out for me is that 58.2%. And that's the respondents who were getting between 4 and 6 hours of sleep nightly, between 4 and 6. And right next to that, you see those getting between 6 and 8 hours. That's 35.8%. Now, to put this in context, the Mayo Clinic says that adults should be getting between 7 and 9 hours of sleep nightly. As you can see, we're far from being there. So, again, here's a summary of the pre-pandemic challenges. And at this point, I'll take a break and let's engage our participants, Marjorie, and hear from them what additional challenges they might have been experiencing and what do they think about the challenges that we've just outlined. And I'll leave the summary up to as a cue, a reminder in terms of what we've covered. But I'd love to entertain some discussion at this point in time.
Okay, it's good that you've said that because we already have 2 questions coming in from the audience. We have someone who perhaps for her, these were 2 burning questions even before you got started. We have one question: how do you handle the bullying storms in academia that seems to have gotten worse during the COVID-19 pandemic? So my thoughts would be that perhaps thinking about the response and to people's reaction, that perhaps that's something you may be able to give us some response to. That's the first question. And the second one, how do you handle professional envy that hampers your endeavors to apply for tenure? So 2 questions, one about how to handle the bullying storms and the other about how to handle professional envy.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think the 2 are somewhat related in terms of the impact that they have. And the first thing that I'm going to say is it's not about you. And that's a very important shift in orientation. Because if you are at the receiving end of bullying or professional envy, if you allow yourself to internalize that, you can become very harsh on yourself, very critical of yourself. And frankly, it's not about you. It says more about the persons who are bullying or the persons who are expressing the envy than it does about you. So that's the first thing. Don't internalize. There's no need for you to be taking on someone else's baggage. Let them carry their own luggage. So that's the first thing. The self-affirmation is the second thing that I would encourage. So, sometimes we're not very kind to ourselves. We can be very critical of ourselves. And self-care, which is something that I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail later on in our time together today, it's very important. So affirm yourself, affirm your competence, affirm your confidence, affirm your integrity, your goodwill, your generosity of spirit. And because we're talking primarily to HR practitioners, another thing that I have to mention is that all our organizations, if they don't have them explicitly articulated, they have a responsibility to provide protection from this type of behavior. So utilize the policies and the procedures that are available to you within your organization. Consult with your HR practitioners to communicate with them about what is happening, the impact that it's having, not just on your productivity, but on the productivity of the organization. Because remember what we talked about before in terms of ensuring the alignment. Because when you can trace the cause and effect in terms of this adverse behavior, this unacceptable behavior, and how it's affecting the organization's ability to deliver on its goals and objectives, it's all of a sudden, again, not about you, but about what the organization needs to do to ensure that it's performing optimally. And the third thing that I would say is to focus your energy on the things that you can control and influence. All right? Professional envy is the nature of human beings, is that you're going to find some who are going to be resentful, who are going to not pay attention to the hard work that you put in to get where you are, but be envious of what you've accomplished as a result of that hard work. Not about you, so don't spend a lot of your time and energy focused there. So focus on what you can influence and what you can control and continue to shine.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Very good response. We have another question here already that says, and it starts with a comment, the challenges that you have highlighted are spot on, clearly defining where we are in the HR space today. The challenge is, what are we going to do to change that narrative, as this is often not attainable?
Well, we're going to present a response to that in the next couple of segments, because I'm going to present a 4-point strategic action plan that I'm proposing for us as HR practitioners. So great question. That's exactly where we're going in this discussion this morning.
Okay, excellent. So those are the only questions coming from the audience right now, but definitely it does highlight the fact that it's some very important issues that are emerging, and being able to do this kind of research that you've done and presented here has really shown where the issue is. So I have no doubt that more questions will come as we go on throughout the session.
Okay, great. And again, to emphasize as we move on, that was pre-pandemic. Then we had March 11th, and in case that date doesn't ring a bell for you, that's when the World Health Organization declared that COVID had become a pandemic. And I present here to you the Serenity Prayer. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'll tell you, it has helped to preserve my sanity over the last few months as we've dealt with the lockdown and the just total disruption of business as usual. So serenity, courage, wisdom. Those are the things that personally I've been praying for every day in order to maintain my sanity. So what should HR be doing? So context matters. So remember where we were. 37% of our respondents had said that they were stretched, 42% that they were stressed, 60% of us already, we weren't getting enough sleep. So what should we be doing? Now I know that you probably haven't been in a plane for quite some while, since they've been grounded for the most part since the pandemic hit, but remember the safety briefing from your last flight. Put on your oxygen mask first before seeking to help anyone else. So HR practitioners, we're expected to take care of the people needs within the organization, but we are compromised in our ability to do so if we ourselves are stressed out, if we're not getting enough sleep, if we're overworked. So this is one of my mantras. Self-care cannot be delegated. You can't assign someone responsibility to take care of you in terms of your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And it's important for you to do this because you cannot pour from an empty cup. So at the beginning of this webinar series, Marjorie had 2 guests on who did a magnificent job in terms of outlining what we could be doing to take care of ourselves. And if you didn't participate in that webinar, I encourage you to go to KVIL's Facebook page and to take that in. What I prepared and shared with you here is a list of 10 self-care strategies that I have found work well for me, and I've utilized them extensively in working with my coaching clients as well to help to keep us sane and productive. And I'm not going to take a deep dive on any one of them. I'm just going to touch briefly on it. However, in the Q&A, I'd be more than happy to elaborate on any of them and to hear from you what additional strategies you might wish to share. So exercise in terms of just getting moving. And one of the most difficult parts of this lockdown for me was when I couldn't get to the gym anymore. And after the gym closed down, then at least I was walking on the street, and then we couldn't do that anymore either. So I had to then find something that I could do inside the house just to keep moving, because exercising, you know, stimulates certain hormones, which are feel-good hormones. So that helps to relieve the stress and to help you feel contented. All right, sleep, we've touched on the fact that we are already not getting enough sleep. Proper nutrition, and this is really important. Food is the fuel that drives us. And imagine if you have a high performance car and you're putting cheap fuel in it, you can't expect the same level of performance. And so it is in terms of what we're putting inside our bodies. Expressing gratitude actually makes us feel better. And if you don't want to take my word for it, then you can check Oprah, because you know she's a big proponent of gratitude. Mindfulness, and this one is challenging because there's just so much to worry about. We worry about if you have kids who are supposed to be taking 11 plus, you worry about that. If you have kids who are getting ready for CXCs, you worry about that. What we propose with mindfulness is to stay in the moment and be very conscious of what's happening here and now, rather than stressing about what happened yesterday and worrying about what might happen tomorrow. Okay. Number 6, make or create something. The process of being creative is another feel-good process. Whether, you know, you're like my husband, who has made so many things for the house since we've been on lockdown, or you're gardening, or you're baking, or you're cooking, sewing, creating art, poetry, whatever it is, the process of creating something new, especially in the context when we're constrained in so many other ways, can really help to alleviate stress. One caveat though, if you're one of those who likes to create in the kitchen, remember number 3, to try and create some stuff that will give you proper nutrition. And if you're on lockdown by yourself, pace yourself in terms of consuming what you create in the kitchen. All right, positive imagery, number 7, I utilize this a lot with my coaching clients, because here's an insight. Your brain cannot make a distinction between a memory or an imagined image and reality. And what does that mean? If I visualize myself in my happy place, my brain reacts as if I'm there in terms of the feelings that I get. So you can summon at will positive thoughts, positive imagery, and have your body respond as if you are there in that positive space, in those positive memories. 8, connecting with others. The reality is we are social beings, and that's why putting someone in solitary confinement is punishment. We are not meant to be on our own, isolated from others. So even as we pay due care and attention to the social distancing protocols, we need to find ways to connect with others. And that's why Zoom and all these other meeting spaces and Skype and all of that have become so popular. And people who thought that they would never embrace technology have found themselves doing so just to make a connection. Number 9 is the response to a well-established myth. And that myth is that it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. It absolutely is not. And so it's important for you to ask for support and to accept support when it's offered to you. And that's the way you can reduce your stress. And number 10, just breathe. Those deep cleansing breaths really do help to bring down your stress levels. And you know, when you go into the doctor's office, typically they'll take your pressure at the beginning of the visit. And if you were rushing from the parking lot, you were stressed coming out of a meeting, chances are your blood pressure might be a little bit elevated. And I'm giving this specific example because it has happened to me on multiple occasions. And so what I do, I sometimes tell them, all right, just give me a few minutes, I can bring it down on my own. And I sit there and I take those deep cleansing breaths and we repeat the measurement and it's fine. So remember to breathe. So here are some pandemic-induced realities now that we have to cope with outside of the self-care component. The International Labour Organization has indicated that the pandemic could reduce global working hours by nearly 7% in the current quarter, and that 81% of the global workforce has been affected by the lockdown. McKinsey, for their part, has said that up to 1/3 of the global workforce is vulnerable to either reduced income, furloughs, or layoffs as a direct result of this pandemic. And then if we bring it closer to home, we've found that 150 million workers in the informal economy in Latin America and the Caribbean have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. And then what compounds all of this is that there's no definitive projection for when, if at all, we'll be able to return to pre-pandemic business as usual when it comes to the where we work and the how we work. I heard in the news the other day that Twitter had decided that their employees would never come back to the office because they could continue to work remotely and accomplish what needed to be done. So again, for each of our organizations, those types of determinations will need to be made. And the final point in terms of the pandemic-related challenges that I've highlighted for you is, for some businesses, being out of regular business for such an extended period of time may result in the loss of your client base. Or in some instances, your business model might no longer be viable in the context of a peri or post-pandemic reality. Those are some additional challenges that we've confronted. Now, again, I'd like to pause here and hear from you if there's any additional challenges that you would like to share with us, given what has happened in your world in relation to COVID.
We have a question coming in here from one of the participants asking, how do you handle the challenges of trying to do the best for your employees, especially during these times of COVID, even though it appears that the employees are still not satisfied despite what you do?
Okay. Yeah, that's a reality. And as HR practitioners, you know, we struggle with this a lot. There are a couple of things that I would say. And the first one is exercise some empathy, all right? Because we have come up with solutions which we think are in the best interest of the employees while taking into consideration the organizational imperatives. However, every individual employee has peculiar circumstances, okay? And we may not be aware of the specific challenges that each of our employees is experiencing. So exercise some empathy, try to understand where they're coming from. And one of the things that I've found as an HR practitioner is our outcome can be improved if we seek first to understand the concerns that are being expressed and only then seek to be understood. So it begins with listening, and then you can tailor your explanation based on what you heard and understood. Because sometimes people just want to be heard, they just want their concerns to be validated. And then in explaining what the constraints are, you can couch it in language that acknowledges and validates that they have their specific concerns. Okay, so start with empathy. And then in addition to hearing and expressing appreciation for what is being shared, link what you have to share with the organizational and in fact national and international imperatives. Because a lot of what is happening now is not under our direct control. We have found ourselves in a crisis. We have found ourselves dealing with some very harsh realities. And as much as we would like to do more, as much as we would like to do better, we have to deal with the constraints that we face. And the third thing that I would say is invite the employees to be part of the problem solving. invite them to make suggestions. And when you get those suggestions, examine them to see what the merit is, and then you can have the conversation in terms of acknowledging those elements that are in fact valid and practical given the constraints, and explaining why those which cannot be implemented cannot be implemented.
Okay, and so from me, I'd like to ask this. So is it possible that you could have a situation where the organization does all of those things, but the employee still does not feel satisfied with the outcome? Because I'm assuming that you could have a situation where the employee's dissatisfaction may be beyond something that the organization can do about it. So is that a situation that could occur as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it happens without a pandemic, so it's certainly going to happen during a pandemic. You're not going to be able to make everyone happy, right? And that, like I said, is separate and apart from being in the midst of a pandemic. And so as HR practitioners, you already have some things in your toolkit in terms of how you cope with those situations. Continue to do what you would normally do when you have disgruntled employees.
Another question coming in: what is your perspective on the return to work with no childcare school options in place? Do you think that the COVID reality will, quote unquote, push women back in the workforce?
Oh, that's a great question. And the first part of it is really easy. What do I think about it? I think it's a lack of due care and attention to the multiple stakeholders who are impacted by policy decisions. And, it's not a judgment, it's simply an observation. Because whenever you're formulating policy, it is imperative. Let me say advisable, because, it doesn't always happen. But you need to look at all the categories of stakeholders who will have a vested interest in the policy that you're developing. And you need to do some projection and, if possible, consultation in terms of what are the likely implications of the move that I'm considering? How is it likely to impact them? And if there's a potential downside, how can we mitigate that downside? Because the harsh reality is, without adequate provisions for childcare, and this is starting from at the level of baby right up to, the teenagers in your household, your mind cannot be at ease. If you're worrying what your older children are getting up to, if you're worrying about whether or not, the younger ones that you left behind, they're safe, that they have adequate supervision. So it's part and parcel of the complex nature of policy formulation, in that we absolutely need to cast as wide a lens as possible to see who is going to be impacted by this policy, what is the potential downside, how can we mitigate those risks. And of course, women bear the heaviest burden when it comes to child rearing. And so if decisions have to be made, for the most part, and I'm generalizing to make a point, but of course there are exceptions where there are men who are the primary caregivers. But for the most part, it's the woman who might have to make a choice about whether or not she can even afford to go back to the job, given the fact that no provisions can be identified for the safe and effective care of the children.
Change management is a challenge that has affected HR practitioners prior to COVID. How do you think the difficulties of unproductivity and performance amongst employees in organizations can be addressed?
Love that question. And listen, I am looking at this as an opportunity. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for us to open things up. Everybody acknowledges it can't be business as usual because of the constraints, because of the realities that we're facing. So here's an opportunity to sneak in some change that maybe you would have liked to get on the agenda from before. And I'm just going to quickly share with you my favorite model of change. And advise that you utilize something like this in terms of your strategizing, in terms of how you can help your organization to address this vexing issue of change. Because the research is well documented that 70% of change initiatives fail. And they fail not because they're not technically sound, but because we don't pay enough attention to the people side of change. So as HR practitioners, we are uniquely positioned to help to fix what's wrong with change. And my go-to strategy for dealing with change is the ADKAR model of change. And the acronym is ADKAR. The A stands for awareness, the D stands for desire, the K stands for knowledge, the next A stands for ability, and the R is for reinforcement. And the ADKAR model, each step builds on the previous step. So for change to happen successfully, the first thing you need to do is to create an awareness of the need for change. Why? What's the purpose of the change? What's the burning platform that would make me give up what I'm comfortable with, what I'm accustomed to, for something else? So how do you make that argument? And make the argument, remember what I said before in terms of looking at things from the perspectives of the various stakeholders. So when you are developing the narrative to create an understanding of the why behind the change and awareness of why the change is required, ensure that your narrative speaks to it from the perspectives of all the different stakeholders. Now, once there's awareness of why we need to change, the next thing we need to focus on is creating the desire for change. Because I can be aware of why the change is necessary, but have absolutely no desire to contribute to it or be a part of it. So the second step would be for us to focus on creating the desire for change within our people. After the D comes the K, the knowledge. So once you have awareness, once you have desire, what people need next is the knowledge of what exactly is the nature of the change, how is it going to take place, etc. And again, HR can help to drive that process. So once persons have the awareness, the desire, the knowledge, the next thing they need is the ability. So if, for example, the change that we're talking about is teleworking, the remote working, then for me to have the ability, I'm going to need to know how to use the app, whatever application or platform we're using. I need to have access to the devices that I need, whatever else we will need in order to have the ability to effect the change. And then the final element in the model is the R for reinforcement. Because if we don't put things in place to reinforce the change, people can start reverting to what they were accustomed to before. So that's it, the ADKAR model: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. Build that into all your change initiatives. That would be my advice. So how can HR add value in the face of the challenges that we've outlined? And I love this quotation from Viktor Frankl. And if you're not familiar with him, Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor. And he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And he wrote an entire book about how he survived the Holocaust and what he observed in terms of those who survived and those who didn't survive. And those who were able to survive, and I'm not going to go into the whole detail of it, but this is part of the secret sauce, is that, and again, go back to the Serenity Prayer: if we can't change the situation, focus on the things that we can change, including ourselves. So here's the start of our 4-point plan. Step 1, HR, take a seat at the table with our strategic business partners to help reimagine the business model. If you're not hearing this conversation taking place within your organization, you need to get it started, because that business as usual, and you hear people saying, oh, I can't wait for things to go back to normal. We are not going back to normal. We have to craft a new normal. So the first step in our 4-point action plan is for us to take a seat at the table and help to reimagine the business model. Step 2, and I hope BDF or the police are not listening when I say start a riot, but I have an explanation, a plausible explanation that will get me out of trouble, even if they do. As HR, we need to disrupt. And the riot that I'm talking about here, it's an acronym, and I'll break it down for you. So as we look, remember, we're reimagining the business, okay? And part of that process is that we need to look critically at the products, the services, the functions that we have within our organization and decide, what do we retain? What do we continue to do even in the context of the pandemic and post-pandemic? So that's the R from Riot. What do we need to improve or innovate? Because some things can't be retained because the way we used to do them is just no longer an option. It's not viable anymore. What improvements, what innovation? And here I want to really encourage you to consider job crafting and bringing other people into the process. You don't have to come up with all the answers on your own. So as you work towards improving and innovating job roles within the organization, get your people involved in the job crafting process. And maybe during the discussions, we can elaborate on that some more. Okay, the O from Riot is outsourced. There may be some functions that you cannot or should not, because of a lack of efficiency, it's not your core competence, it's not your wheel well, that you get someone else to do that part of it. And so, for example, we have all these restaurants that people can't come in to dine anymore. So you say, well, you can have a curbside or you can have a delivery service. The restaurant doesn't have efficiency when it comes to moving food out into the community. But that's something you can outsource. So taxi drivers, they're looking to see how they can reimagine their business model. So there's an opportunity for a partnership there. So that's the O from Riot. And the T is terminated. The harsh reality is, for some organizations, there are things that you used to do pre-COVID that you just won't be able to do anymore for various reasons. So that's the Riot. What do you retain? What do you improve or innovate? What do you outsource? And what do you terminate? So that's step 2, you started a Riot. Step 3, having reimagined the business, having had your Riot, the next thing you need to engage in is some workforce planning. So based on the new roles that you have on the post-Riot view of your organization and what it's doing, you then need to identify which positions, which roles are mission critical or strategic, which roles are core, which are supportive, and again, because you may have terminated some of the services, which ones are obsolete. HR needs to lead the charge in doing this. And I want to emphasize, we're not talking about designating people as strategic, core, supportive, or obsolete. We're talking about designating roles, because the roles have shifted. After that, then, in terms of how you go about planning your workforce, then you look at, okay, what are the actual human resources that I have, and where can I position them based on this reimagined business, based on these new designated job roles. Okay, and the fourth and final step is to ensure that HR is, first of all, agile. It's really easy for us to, get into a routine, get into a tradition, a certain way of doing things, get into habits. And there's a quotation that I love. It says, the chains of habits are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be removed. So, sometimes some things are so ingrained in us that it's really difficult to change, but that's exactly what we need to do. In this new era, HR absolutely needs to be agile. We need to be able to respond in real time to the changes that are taking place externally as well as internally. HR also needs to be able to financially justify whatever initiative we're coming up with. And this is part of the strategic alignment conversation from before. So if we are advocating for a certain project, a certain introduction of a certain program, we need to be able to talk about its financial implications. I'm not saying that there will not be any interventions that you might recommend, which would not necessarily represent a cost center. But if in fact you realize this is going to represent a cost center, you need to be able to have a conversation about why it's worth it, why the investment in this cost center is going to pay dividends in other areas. So Agile, financially justifiable. And again, let's not lose the gains that we made from 2005 in terms of ensuring that we remain aligned. This time we align to the new strategic business objectives, and we keep our eyes on them so that when they shift, we shift with them to ensure ongoing relevance. So, recap of our HR action agenda, the 4-point agenda. Take a seat at the table to reimagine the business model, start a riot, engage in your strategic workforce planning, and ensure that your agility is there, that you, whatever you're recommending, you can justify it financially, even if it's a cost center, and that we are aligned to the new business objectives. So Marjorie, let's open up again.
As the HR person who's perhaps having to take some of those tough decisions when it comes to dealing with the workforce, perhaps what your suggestion might be on how they can proceed. So here's the first one. I agree that empathy and open dialogue between employers and employees will help everyone come to some sort of better understanding of the decisions being made. But how do you package laying off or terminating someone who was the only person working in their household, which included a spouse, a young baby, and an elderly parent?
Those decisions and those conversations are always really, really difficult to have. And, you know, the best answer that I can give is that hopefully you already have an employee assistance program in place. If you don't, that's something that you should place on your priority list, because there's going to be significant need for it. If you're a really small entity and you're not in a position to develop your own employee assistance program, certainly look to tap into those that are available through the governmental services. All right. The unfortunate reality is that there will be those conversations. Okay. Try to make the best possible use in terms of, if your organization is in the position to do so, having the support mechanisms to help facilitate the transition. If you can't do it, then look to the state services. You know, just before the pandemic was declared, I was working with a client where the entire management team was going through a team building and leadership development a multi-module program. And I kid you not, the module that we had before the pandemic was declared was on having difficult conversations. And the very next day, some of the people who were in the room for that training were laid off. And, you know, it's just the reality of the situation in which we find ourselves. So again, remember that from Frankl, if you can't change the circumstances, focus on what you can change within yourself, and that is you have to, the self-care. Because as HR practitioners who have these conversations multiple times, it does something to us in terms of just eroding our soul. And so self-care is also important. You have to have the conversations focused on taking care of yourself afterwards, so that you can continue to do what you need to do for yourself, for your family, and for the organization.
Okay. All right, so 2 important things there, those skills for difficult conversations before and those skills for self-care afterwards. Another question here is, how do you prepare for the looming cut in pay, allowances, benefits, etc. from your employer, especially if those staff members are living from quote unquote paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah. And you know, the reality is some people were living from paycheck to the week before the next paycheck. One of the things that my personal experience, my husband is a retired soldier. And when the lockdown was declared, he called a family meeting. So it was him, his grandson and I, and he said, okay, things have to change. And he said, for one thing, we eat too much. We don't need to be eating this much. So he said, breakfast, you can have 1 egg. You can have, and he told us, you cut down your consumption because this is not business as usual. Now, the thing is, I'm looking at him, I'm like, perhaps you're overreacting a bit, but then, I realized that we need to start to change how we navigate, how we live, because it could get quite difficult. And so let's start making the changes now before we have to make them in a really drastic and sudden way because we have no choice. So yes, there are certain things that persons may need to adjust in terms of what their typical monthly schedule of expenses might look like. I absolutely get it that there's some things that are not discretionary, because if you're in Barbados, you have to pay the Barbados Water Authority, you have to pay light and power, you have to buy food, but look at what you're buying and how you're consuming food to reduce wastage, etc. But, do you need to consume as much electricity? Can you start conserving water? Can you start reducing your gas bill? What, your entertainment budget almost by, force is constrained because you can't go out anymore. So there's some things that I would suggest, and the financial planner that we had on the webinar series a few weeks ago was able to give some advice about that. But for all of us, we really should be looking at how we spend, what we spend on, and what changes we can make there to be more conservative. And if you can't identify anything else, go and talk to an old person, because they for sure know how to cut and contrive based on the challenges that they experience coming up.
Yeah, and you'll often hear that, even that phrase comes from many of our older family members talking about those things. Yeah, they know how to cut and contrive.
Yep.
We have someone who's asking for a little more about the ADKAR model. The question specifically is this: can you speak more on how the desire for the change can be inculcated?
Absolutely. So, I remember years ago, a trainer said in a session that I was in, everyone walks around with their minds tuned in to station WIIFM. What's in it for me? So to help people to have desire for the change, you need to be able to speak to them via channel WIIFM. What's in the change for them? How can the change benefit them? Or what is the harm that will come to them if the change doesn't take place? Because when someone jumps off a burning platform and jumps into the sea, it's not necessarily because they want to swim. They don't want to get burnt. So if you're not moving towards the change because you want what the change represents, you may be moving with the change because there's something coming at you that you want to avoid. So have that conversation to stimulate desire.
How do I remain professionally productive working in a small to mid-sized family business where I am being challenged by performing professionally versus do as I say? And that do as I say is coming from the owners of the business. And
read the question from me again.
Sure. The person is asking how can they remain professionally productive. They are working in a small to medium sized family business, and consistently they're being challenged when they want to perform professionally. They're being challenged with the concept of do as I say. And that do as I say is coming from the owners. So the individual is trying to understand, how do I keep my professional, what I know should be done professionally, rather than just adhering to the do as I say from the owners?
Okay, now I'm going to say something that may, challenge a number of people who are listening to me. But remember what Frankl said: if you cannot change the situation, maybe it's time to change yourself. So we all, as professionals, have this image. We have our quality standards. We know what professional means for us in terms of the standards to which we hold ourselves accountable. we are not in a business as usual situation. So my advice to you, absent COVID, will be very different than what I'm going to say right now. What I'm going to say to you right now is that the circumstances have changed. So in order to be fit for purpose, in order to survive and ultimately thrive in this context, what was your professional productivity before? Maybe you need to redefine it now. And again, start with empathy. Because if this person is a small business owner, family business, and operating in this context, they must be under some serious stress in terms of concerns about their business surviving this. So seek to understand this, do as I say, what's driving that, okay? So have a conversation geared towards your having a better understanding and truly be open in terms of what it is that the person wants to accomplish. And if you think that there are more effective ways, more productive ways of accomplishing it, then you can find a way to introduce that into the conversation. And again, I would encourage you to do some research about having those difficult conversations, okay? Bottom line, if at the end of the day you've done that and you just cannot bring yourself to do what is being asked of you because it's not compatible with your personal value system, or any reason that you feel very strongly, I just cannot deliver what you're asking of me, then there's some options that open up for you at that point in time in terms of your way forward and what changes you will put in place.
All right, because sometimes you have to decide if you can live with the situation, and if you
Exactly.
can't, what are you going to do about it? Okay, so I think we'll take a break from the questions now. We'll move forward with the slides, and then we can come back to the remaining questions.
Okay. All right, so we're on a home stretch. We just have about 15 minutes left. So we've done the past. We looked at what's happening now, and let's talk a bit more about the future. All right, and if we had a crystal ball, it would probably not be able to tell us what's going on, and that's because we're in a VUCA environment. I don't know if you're familiar with the acronym, but VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we are in VUCA on steroids right now. And the image says turbulence ahead. It's not ahead. We are in the turbulent situation right now. So let me get you involved in this. And Marjorie, I'm going to ask persons to type into either the chat box or if they're using Q&A, I'm not sure which one they're using, to just type in A or B based on what they think is the appropriate answer. So managing in a business as usual versus a VUCA scenario. And I just explained what VUCA is: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions. Should you A, wait for additional information before making a decision, or should you B, act with a sense of urgency? So go ahead and type in either A or B, and Marjorie, if you could let me know what we're seeing from our participants.
We're seeing a lot of B's. We have one A. Let's see, some people are also typing in Q&A. In Q and A, we are seeing B's. It's the majority of people are choosing B.
All right, with good reason. We need to have a sense of urgency. So in the face of uncertainty, it's understandable that you would want to wait. So for those who said A, yes, I get it. You want to wait to make sure you have enough information to make the right decision. But the thing is, because it's so volatile, as soon as you get information, it may change. Just think about what you've been hearing from our own government here in Barbados, and we move from phase to phase, okay? World Health Organization has changed their position on masks, for example. So you can't wait for it to stabilize and say, okay, this is it, it's not gonna change. So we need to act with a sense of urgency and not be paralyzed by the desire to know everything and analyze everything before we move. Okay, great job. Here's another one. So in a VUCA environment, do you stay the course, or B, do you update constantly? A or B?
Okay, we're seeing B's, B. B. All right. Everybody's saying we need to update constantly.
And the image of the individual that you're seeing on the screen is she's provided a master class in terms of how you effectively navigate a VUCA environment. So we get the constant updates as the situation evolves. You can see, and she says it all the time, we are learning as we go through this. You hear her saying that she's listening to the medical experts. She's listening. She's seeking out diverse opinions in order to inform her decision making. That is quintessentially the way to successfully navigate VUCA environment. So I tip my proverbial hat to Prime Minister Mia Mottley. All right, let's try another one. Do you downplay the threat and withhold bad news, or do you communicate with transparency? A or B?
Okay, we're getting the responses suggesting we need to communicate with transparency.
All right.
Yep.
And my exemplar for this one is Governor Cuomo. So Governor Cuomo has been honest. He's been accurate. He tells you what he knows. He tells you what he doesn't know. He tells you what he anticipates, and he tells you what's likely to happen if what he anticipates happens. But at the same time, he always, always infuses his message with hope. So he's not downplaying it, he gives it to you straight, okay? But he always gives you reason to keep hope alive. All right, here's another one. Do you double down to explain your actions more clearly, or do you take responsibility and focus on solving the problem? A or B?
Okay. Almost universally, everyone's saying we take responsibility and focus on solving problems.
Absolutely.
Let's see, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
and this is an example of someone who chose A. Okay, we see President Trump insisting on doubling down on things he said that have since been proven wrong, but he is not budging from that original perspective. Okay, so the appropriate response to any misstep, because there will be missteps because we're in a VUCA environment. We listen, we acknowledge, we reorient, and work on solving the problem again. And I'd like to give an example again from what I observed here in Barbados. When the government first announced that there was going to be this lockdown, and there was this massive rush towards the supermarkets, and people were criticizing, the government didn't plan it properly, and, of course people are going to rush because they don't know they'll be able to get food and blah, blah, blah. They didn't spend a lot of time defending what they did. They took the advice on board, and they came back with the system where, based on, the first letter of your last name, you were assigned a day and a time during the day when you could go to the grocery store, to the bank, etc. So they took responsibility, focused on solving the problem, and utilized the recommendations that they got in order to do so. All right, so thanks for playing along with that. As I wrap up now, my final word for you in terms of going forward, two things that I encourage you to have with you always as you cope with these challenges are adaptability and resilience. You need to be able to adjust to the new conditions because, as I said before, we're in a VUCA on steroids environment. Things are going to change. They're unpredictable, okay? They're complex, they're volatile. So be adaptable, be willing and able to adjust as things change. And then in terms of resilience, that speaks about how you approach it in terms of your capacity to be ready to deal with these, with the VUCA environment, to recover when, because there are going to be some things that you just didn't see coming. There'll be some things that will drive your stress levels up. If you're resilient, you will adapt to them. And, you know, I saw somewhere someone challenged the concept of resilience, meaning bounce back. There's no going back, people. As I said before, we're not going to have business as usual again. What you want to do is bounce forward, to spring into the future with agility, ready, willing, and able to be adaptable and to move on from that disruptive experience. All right, and Marjorie, back over to you.
We have one person who is saying they're asking for a few tips on how to remain sane in the working from home environment. You can't have quick chats at the coffee break or lunch break. And some folks enjoy those compliments and chatter that they get from coworkers when they show up at work. And many home life situations just do not allow us to feed that aspect of our being. So what are a few tips that you could offer to remain sane in the working from home environment?
Great question. No, I'm in a peculiar situation because I've been working from home for years. So my challenge now is that I have all these people, well, I shouldn't say all these people. My husband is now at home with me when before I had the place to myself. All right. So, but I can relate to what the question, the person posing the question has indicated. So let me start in terms of how you can build breaks into your routine. And well, first of all, let me say, establish a routine. It's important. Because when I first started working from home and I spoke to people who had done it before, that was one of the things that they emphasize. They say, while you're in the house, it's important for you still to have a routine. So don't be, you know, lounging around in your pajamas all day long. You know, you get up, you get dressed, and you go to work in the same way. All right. So that needs to be part of your routine or your ritual. So in terms of, remember I said when we looked at the 10 coping strategies for self-care, yes, you do need to have that social interaction, and you can. So if you at work take a morning break, you know, at 10:30 or whatever, take the morning break while you're working from home. And at that time, you can go on social media, or if there's someone else in the house with you, you can have an interaction with them. But ensure that you communicate with persons that this is my structured break, so I'm going to engage with you during this time, but it doesn't mean that it's open sesame all day long. It means that this is part of how I'm coping with this, is to have a certain amount of routine, including the social engagement. Another important part is having a designated workspace. And this will look different for everyone, but whatever it is, make sure that you create it for yourself and you communicate with the other people in your environment that this is your designated workspace, and ask that they respect it as such. So even though it may be a corner in the living room and everybody can see it's the living room, get an understanding that this is my office. So, you know, treat it with that understanding and that degree of respect. All right, so hopefully those 2 tips will be useful for you.
Absolutely. So it's not that we can't have the coffee break or lunch break. We just are moving the location. You have your coffee break at your, instead of around the water cooler, you have it around your coffee machine or your kettle at home. All right, we have another comment about working from home. One individual saying, in my organization, some employees seem not to be able to work full hours. Are there any recommendations for their supervisors?
Okay, see, this is the perfect conversation for the job crafting. Remember when I spoke about having the riot and how you innovate and how you improve on how you have the roles defined. So, but before I delve into that, let me just say this one thing, and because I actually had an interesting conversation with my niece a few weeks ago about this in terms of how do you know when someone is working? And it depends on the nature of the job. Because for many of us, those of us who are knowledge workers, you don't need to be sitting behind a desktop or a laptop to be working, because you work inside your head. So rather than looking at, are they punching the clock, focus on the deliverables. What is it that you need them to complete, and are they completing that? Okay, so, just suggesting a bit of a shift there. But for those where the time, the level of effort is directly related to them sitting behind, whatever device, then a conversation with them, because remember, again, empathy, what's happening in their home environment. So if they have to be dealing with preparing some, schoolwork for kids, supervising kids, or elder care or something like that, then have a conversation first. Goal, understand what their situation is. Next goal, how can we craft a job for you that will enable you to take care of those responsibilities and, not or, but and fulfill some obligations to the organization. And maybe it's a case where you do need to scale back their level of responsibility. And then as an HR practitioner, you know what goes along with that in terms of, are they going on reduced hours, et cetera, et cetera. But empathy, let that precede everything.
How do I keep motivated and in tune with HR when the HR world is new to me?
You see, that's what's so exciting about it. The HR world is new to you, and there's just so much going on. And I tell you, those of you who are coming into the profession know you have it so much easier. I mean, I've been an HR professional now for 2 decades. It's so easy to get information, to get knowledge today. I mean, look at what's happening this morning. You have been able to stay within your own environment and be part of a community of HR practitioners, of people who are learning together, growing together. So the resources that are available online are tremendous. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you, if you're in Barbados, you can join HERMAB. If you're, whichever country that you're in the region, there's likely an HR organization. I know because I'm members of the one here, I'm a member of the one in Barbados and also in Antigua. I'm familiar with the one in Jamaica and Trinidad as well. So find your HR association and join, because it can get pretty lonely, especially if you have a small department or a department of one. It can seem overwhelming. But if you have a community you can tap into, sometimes just to vent, to find somebody else to tell you that, yes, I feel your pain, I'm going through the same thing here, to get advice. So do that. And you also have the online resources that are available to you, and a lot of it is free. Okay, and follow the Cable School of Business. In addition to this free webinar series, their leadership development, executive development programming, that short-term programs that they offer from time to time. So it's an exciting time to be an HR practitioner. And I put it to you, if you do the work, it'll also be a rewarding time for you to be an HR practitioner. So welcome to the profession.
Thank you for mentioning those programs that we have coming up. And indeed, many of those webinars that have already been offered are available on our YouTube channel as well as on our Facebook page. So you can feel free to access them on the Facebook page of the Sagicor Cable School of Business. And we have upcoming a few webinars that are really intended to address some of the issues that have also been identified here, including the one about financing and how to deal with your issues and so on. So look out for information on how to get out of debt easily, because we have our personal finance professional is going to give us all tips on how easy it is to get out of debt. So that's going to be a fascinating one. And as we wrap up, Joan, there's one last question that I'm seeing here. I don't know if you can or you want to take a stab at. Someone's saying, working from home, what are a few examples of jobs that you think may seriously be sustained in this framework?
I mean, I think I can't even begin to conceptualize all the avenues that are available. because there's just so much. And let me just give you a category of it, because in terms of delivering products to household, because I mean, with the advisory that we had to wear masks, I didn't have any masks at home. So I was able to go online on Facebook and Marketplace, find vendors with masks and have masks delivered to my home. There's so many products that people need that you can deliver to them. There's services that people need. Because let me give you an example of a service that I absolutely would be the first and the longest standing to go and renew your vehicle license. I am allergic to standing in line, okay? There's some people, and especially those who be in the designated vulnerable groups, who can't be out and about doing things. So if you can do things for them, that's a business opportunity. Writing, okay? So do you want to start a blog? Do you want to start a newsletter? Because if you've found ways of getting around the challenges, or you just have information that you think would be of value to other people, there are opportunities there. So, you know, your creativity is what is going to limit you, because people think about needs that people still have, which still need to be met, but need to be met differently. And then ask yourself, how might I be able to capitalize on that?
For small enterprises, what do you determine, or when do you determine, is the best stage to either have a dedicated HR professional in-house or outsourced, rather than a multifunction HR role?
Okay. I have a preference, okay, because, you know, as someone who owns a small business, really, really small, I'm the only employee. When I need services, I procure the services. So based on the nature of your business, you may not have enough demand for a full-time HR practitioner. And rather, as the question itself indicated, rather than tacking HR onto, you know, the person that does finance or the person that does marketing, when HR is not their competency, why not find an HR practitioner who offers that service? So this is their area of expertise. So even though you don't need them first full-time, you have access to the best possible expertise, so that you know that you're getting high quality HR service, rather than having it, you know, in the room next to you, but, you know, it's hit or miss. And there are lots of HR practitioners out there who can help you with that. And if you call your HR association, they'll be more than happy to give you a referral for that.
So thank you all for joining us today. Our topic has been coping with challenges, strategies for HR managers. Thanks to our presenter, Ambassador Joan Underwood, for a rich and enlightening session today. For more information on the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business or our programs, please visit our website, uwichsb.org. As always, we invite you to keep this conversation going on our Facebook page and reach out to us if you need any additional information or clarification. Hopefully, you will be able to join us for our next Friday webinar, when we will be discussing the topic Digital Economies, Payment Systems. I look forward to seeing you then. Stay safe and stay sane, and enjoy the rest of your day.